have the pleasure of introducing you to one of the stars of Maestro, a SAG nominee. Please join me in welcoming Carey Mulligan. Congratulations. So much good for you right now, and it makes me so happy.
Thank you.
I want to go back to the very, very beginning of the Maestro process for you, because I know you signed on without reading a script, and it was back in 2018, so I don't even know if A Star is Born was available yet. So at that point, what was it about Bradley's pitch that gave you confidence in his story and in him as a director?
Gosh, so many. Hi, everyone. I got very nervous all of a sudden. It was so quiet.
I started with a serious question.
No. I mean, when I was standing there, it was, hi. It was 2018. I was doing a play off Broadway in New York, a one-woman show, and he came to see me in that, and then he asked me to do this. And there wasn't this script. There was a script that Josh Singer had been working on for a while. But yes, Bradley and Josh were going to come back to it kind of afresh and start their story. But he showed me A Star is Born. So it wasn't out, but it was finished. So I got to go and watch it. And I took my friend Zoe Kazan, because I think she's very clever and has good taste. And I was like, it's good, isn't it? She was like, yeah, it's really good. It was just the whole project was so exciting. And obviously A Star is Born was amazing. And the more I learned about Felicia, the more excited I was to play her.
Oh, yes. I have a lot of questions about learning about her and applying it to your performance here. But I wanted to go back to the idea of you first signing on in 2018, and then the movie didn't go into production until I believe it was late 2021. And you made a bunch of movies in between. So is there any particular film or experience you had in between that you wound up looking back on and saying to yourself, I'm so glad that happened before Maestro?
Oh, that's such a good question. So 2018. So then after that, I did Promising Young Woman. Thank you. I did Promising Young Woman, and then I did The Dig, and then we went into, a global pandemic and everything shut down. So in that time, I think originally Maestro was meant to go in 2020. Obviously, it didn't. And then again in 2021. So it pushed till 2022 is when we actually started shooting. So there was a lot of time in there. And actually, the more time we had, the better, really, because it meant that every time I was in New York or LA, Bradley and I would get together, usually with Josh Singer, who co-wrote the script with Bradley, and we'd read it out. And then we got to do cool things like Yannick Seguin, who was the musical supervisor on the film and helped Bradley with all of the conducting, invited us to Philadelphia, and we went and narrated Candide for 3 performances with the Philadelphia Philharmonic. So we got to do lots of sort of, scary bonding fun things, which I think meant that by the time we actually got to filming it, Bradley and I were very close and had done lots of work on these characters.
Well, this kind of leans into that a little bit. Can you tell us something about your prep process that stays the same from film to film, but then also something specific to Felicia that was a first-time prep element for you here?
I mean, lots was first time with this one. Same, there's nothing really that's the sort of from one to the next, really. I think some things are so, I think theatre, I always felt like when I did a play, I had a lot more bandwidth to do prep. I don't know if that's because there's designated rehearsal time, and with film there rarely is, or at least in my experience. But with this one, it was clear from Bradley that he really wanted to do like very, very intensive kind of like a workshop, just the two of us to work on Lenny and Felicia, but also that the dialect and the way that they spoke would be very specific. So it was lots and lots of work with Tim Monick, who's an amazing dialect coach.
Oh, this might be overly prescribed and not the way you do it, but when you are prepping to play her, what is the very first thing you find? The first thing you nail that lets you say to yourself, I am on the right track, but then I also want to know the last piece of her you found, the thing that made you think, like, I have a full version of her to bring to screen now.
Oh, gosh. Well, she's a real person. I think that was the thing that was so I played a couple of real people, but none that had, her children are all in their 60s. They were really involved, and so supportive. I also went to Santiago, Chile, and met her wider family. So there was just a lot of feeling of the family being very much on our side and helping us and wanting to give us as much as they, but that was also, that felt, you're telling someone's whole life. It's quite a, so there was lots. Her voice was really key, I think, and just sort of, because there's these amazing tapes of her speaking that she's interviewed by John Gruen. He wrote a book called The Private World of Leonard Bernstein. He interviewed Lenny and the family. And in that, she talks quite candidly about what it is to be Lenny's wife. And some of that is in the film and some of it isn't. And I felt like it was such a window into her. And lots of her letters and things like that. So I think I had her voice on these tapes in my head for like 4 years. Just, I would listen to it instead of a podcast. It was just something I would have in my ears when I was like, going on the school run or whatever. Just, that was my kind of background music. So I think that when I could do her voice, I felt like there was that, but I didn't. I think halfway through the shoot, we were still learning stuff that went into it.
That's the beauty of filmmaking, though. I love that. I also have the perfect follow-up to what you were just explaining. So when you do so much research and you have the opportunity to spend so much time with people who truly knew her, is there anything in particular you learned that we don't see or hear about directly in the movie, but you held tight to it and now we could feel it influencing your performance?
Well, you're not going to know. It will make no difference to you at all, but I'll tell you anyway. Is that, well, she was a painter as well, and got much more into painting when she sort of moved away from acting, and it became something that she really loved, and she was a very good painter, and her paintings are all over the house in Fairfield, which we filmed in, which is their house in there, all over her home in Santiago, Chile, where her family live. And so painting was something that there was in the script at one point a huge section where she painted and was frustrated with her painting. And it was a lot to do with what her artistry became when she decided to move away from acting or moved away from acting, whether that was a decision or not. And I hadn't painted since I was about 5 years old. So I went and had painting lessons for about 3 months in LA. And then came to Bradley and was like, I can paint now. And then he was like, that's not in the film anymore. But anyway, I'm now can sort of vaguely paint, which is fun. And that's enough fun, but I felt like a lot of her, there was so much about her that fascinated me that, it was these two artists living side by side, one of whom was an artist and the other whom was an artist that was touched by God, that everyone heralded as a voice of his generation, an icon. And what must that be like to be? And Steven Spielberg, who's a producer on this film, said to Bradley early on something I thought was so poignant, but he said, Felicia made Lenny her art. And I think that was that idea of artistry and what her artistic contribution was going to be to the world was something that really fascinated me. And the painting was sort of a part of that. Oh,
you feel that so much while you're watching it. And also now I feel like you should pursue a role where you play a painter, put those skills to use.
I mean, now I've done it. And I'm not very good.
Fair enough. Just for fun, if you could learn a new skill or about a different profession for a role, what would you choose and why?
Oh, I don't know, scuba diving or something.
I'll take that. Okay. I'll wait eagerly for that movie next. I want to ask you, obviously, about working with Bradley. You've worked with a number of exceptional directors at this point. Do you notice any shared traits among the directing greats? And then can you also tell us one of a kind about Bradley as a director?
Well, I've also been lucky enough to work with some directors who are also actors. So Paul Dano, he didn't act in the film, but he directed me. Emerald Fennell is an actress who directed Promising Young Woman and Saltburn.
We could clap for Saltburn, no?
Yeah.
There we go.
Different movie. But yeah, I do think I've worked with brilliant directors who don't act, who equally have an amazing understanding of how actors work. But I do think there's something kind of wonderful, particularly in a moment where you have sort of an irrational block where you can't. I think sometimes actors are very good at identifying that and kind of getting you out of it. And all of those three directors could do that. Bradley, the experience of working with him on this was so interesting because he did something where he made the crew feel like a part of the company. So it was there was no real, he did sort of everything he could to remove the artifice from filmmaking. So when you arrived on set, there was no shouting action, there was nothing kind of technical. It was very, the crew was sort of part of the scene. So if there's a scene in the film where you can't see Bradley's face, like in the doctor's office when she receives the diagnosis, there's moments where you can't see his mouth, and in those moments he's talking to the dolly grip Mango, and he's telling Mango to get closer in with the camera. So there'll be time, because he'd wanted to shoot so many things in one-ers, or often he'll be directing the crew whilst he's in the scene with us. But there was nothing kind of distracting about it. In fact, it felt sort of more cohesive. It felt like part of the story in a really interesting way. So he would do that, and I just don't know how his brain works like that.
So very effective approach right there. Yeah. And the one-ers served the movie and the story so well. How about in terms of working with him as an actor's director? Because I've heard you talk about this before, and I found it fascinating. You were kind of explaining how on set, when he was acting in a scene with you, he would act, but via his performance, where he would make choices to spark different choices in you. And I was wondering, can you give us an example of a time when that happened?
So he would direct by, I mean, he'd obviously give notes sometimes, but he would also direct by the way that he played the scene. So the Thanksgiving Day fight scene, we did 3 takes of that scene, and the first 2 takes were, a fight, but that had no crescendo. It was just a kind of weird, bitter. Both of us knew that it didn't feel the right way. And I can't remember if he had the milk carton in the first 2 takes, but on the 3rd take, he walks in with this milk carton and his sunglasses on, and he didn't take them off, and it just annoyed me so much. And there was something about the way he bumped into the furniture, all of that stuff he didn't do on the previous take. And it was just so much more irritating. And then that take was the only take where I stood in the window. It was the only take where I moved towards him at the end of the scene. But what's also amazing about that is that in the previous 2 takes, I'd sat in the armchair for the entire thing, because it hadn't, the fight didn't take off in the same way. But at this point, in this one, I moved towards him. And then there's that pause at the end of the fight, and I thought, well, there's no more words, so I'll just stand here, because I knew he was not cutting, and he often would let things roll, but I didn't know what he was waiting for. And then he responded to a voice that I couldn't hear because there was no one there, so he was talking to the children, who he then added in later. And then he allowed for just the amount of time that it would take for a big float thing of Snoopy to go past the window that was added in later on green screen, and then the scene ended. And he did all of that live, just in that scene. There was he didn't think 1, 2, 3. He just timed it out in his head, and I didn't know what we were waiting for the whole time. I was like, oh. And then but that's the level of, I don't know how he did it. Basically, is the point of that story.
I feel like something like that could answer this question, but I've heard you talk about how Felicia watches Leonard and how you've been able to watch Bradley. It could kind of mirror each other in a sense. And I wrote this down. I loved how you said it. You said there were lots of swells of pride you had watching him, which kind of just filled my heart. So I wanted to know, can you give us a couple of examples of, times when you were watching him work and filled you with that great pride?
Yeah, all the time. I mean, I just think it was just such a massive swing. I remember the first day I walked on set, I wasn't shooting. I came to see what they were doing, and we were at Tanglewood, and I wanted to come and just see and meet people. And he was, 80-year-old Lenny conducting William. That was the first scene he shot in the entire film, and that's one of the last scenes in the film. And I just thought, I can't. First of all, I thought, shit, I'm gonna have to really up my game. This is, but secondly, I just thought, wow, it's so huge what he's attempting to do, and he was successfully doing it on day one, and that was what was so kind of awe-inspiring. But that went the whole way through. But the thing that really got me was, so we shot most of the film in New York, and then we had a couple of months off, and then we shot Ely Cathedral, which is that 6-minute thing.
It's one of my favorite scenes of the whole damn year.
Which is incredible. And, and he was, again, Leonard Bernstein dialect, holding a cigarette, and it's the London Symphony Orchestra, who are arguably the, most serious terrifying, brilliant, but they're proper, they don't fuck around, and they're sitting there, looking up at this actor, who's dressed up like Leonard Bernstein. And I just thought, the nerve of him to do that, that's so... And I was nervous, and I didn't have to do anything. I just had to stand there in a dress. But I was like, fuck, I hope they believe me. I'm just in a dress. But, I was pretending to be older than I am. And I just, I was intimidated by them just as an actor, and let alone doing anything musical. So I thought, that was a massive thing. And he spent all day thinking that he hadn't got it right. And I think probably by, very, very high musical standards, he hadn't got it right. But to a layman, or to basically 90% of the room, it looked amazing. But he wasn't happy. And then he constructed this shot that's in the film, and he did it. And in that take, I was genuinely just so proud of him. I watch
a scene like that, and I hear him talk about it too, and I think to myself, oh, he must be a perfectionist as an artist. But then I read a quote. Matthew Libatique had said this. He was talking about working with Bradley, and he says, when you do, you have to be open, because things could change, and they always change for the better. So can you give us an example of a scene where you all went in with a plan, something changed and offered something new, and it made a scene even better?
I mean, we did, the thing I think we had more was that we would just invent scenes, so there's a scene where we're sort of sitting by the swimming pool, and we're sort of disagreeing about Tommy, but it's shot from very far away, and you can't see us, but it's sort of... And so Bradley and I were sitting there that day, and we were setting up to shoot something else, and we were talking about whatever we had been doing, and he said, we should just shoot this conversation right here. Let's just shoot this. And he went and set it up, and I just stayed there. My iPhone was sitting on which is very unprofessional. It was sitting because I wasn't thinking we were filming anything. And I said, shall I move this? He said, no. I said, shall I take my hat off? He was like, nah, fuck it. Let's just do it. And we shot that. We improvised that scene. And then he cut, and he was like, move on. And I was like, that'll never be in the film. But it was. But it was that kind of liveness that made it so fun, because you were it was like putting a collage together. I didn't even know what was going to be eventually in the film, but it was, we were always just inventing.
I always love talking about the idea that films change every single step of the way, in the script phase, on set, in the edit, and then again when an audience receives it and gets to process it their own way. Is there anything about the audience reaction to this movie that has either surprised you, or maybe even made you, having been in the movie, rethink something you did?
I don't know. I just think it's so funny how funny everyone finds the Snoopy thing. I mean, I love that, but I don't know. I've only watched it once with an audience. I watched it the LA premiere. It was the only time I've seen it. That's the only time I've seen it finished, but that's the only time I've seen it with an audience. So it was quite kind of weird and overwhelming.
So easy for me to sit here and be like, you should watch your good work over and over. And then
no, we went and introduced it in IMAX. And that one, I didn't watch it, but I was like, oh, not seeing your face that big. That's not good for anyone. But I would love to sit through and watch it but it's an odd experience.
It's something else. It's something very special. Going into filming, of all the ambitious scenes in this movie, which one did you think would be most challenging for you to pull off? And ultimately, was that indeed the most challenging, or did a different one catch you by surprise?
I thought everything from when she was unwell at the end was going to be the most challenging, but it wasn't. It was the scene and the talking to Shirley in the diner when she's telling the story about the date that goes wrong was the most challenging. I think it was because it was one of the few scenes where Bradley wasn't Lenny, and I had gotten so used to just acting with him, and I loved acting with Sarah Silverman. She was so brilliant, but I just suddenly got... And it was also a scene that when I read it, and this often happens, when I read it, I thought, that's such good writing. And then I thought about it a lot, and then I thought, I'm going to completely fuck it up on the day. And I got to it, and I got stuck in my own head, but Bradley was just incredible. But that was probably harder than anything else.
Oh, I have so many follow-up questions. We're having a dwindling time too. I'm gonna try to squeeze in 3 more here, because you brought up Sarah. You have an exceptional ensemble around you in the film, in addition to her and Bradley. Can you name a time when a scene partner gave you just what you needed to, either crush a tough scene, or even find something in Felicia that you might not have been able to access without them?
I mean, Sarah was definitely in that scene in Palm Court. She was just so, because, earlier on in the film, Shirley had been so kind of, eccentric and kind of, loud and kind of imposing. And then suddenly in that scene, which we would say is probably 25, 30 years later, there's so much about Shirley that's like bedded in and grounded, and she's aged, and you can see that they formed a relationship, and she just listened so effectively, which I think is a completely underrated skill from an actor, that you just are able to listen. And she was just an open vessel of listening the whole scene. And I found it, I was just incredible to act with.
Listening and good reaction shots. I feel like when we were talking about the Ely Cathedral part, you were kind of lessening the value of what you were doing in that scene, but every reaction shot just says so much, and that should always be praised as well. All right, because you brought up how good the writing is in this movie, I'm going to reference one particular scene that I love and kind of ask you a personal career question using it. So it's the moment when they're having lunch and someone essentially says to Leonard, you should change your last name. The music that you want to pursue is how do they refer to it? Like it's not the right music. It's not serious music. That's what it is. And then she tells him that's the kind of work she wants to see. She wants him to share it with him. Who is the Felicia in your career? The person at just the right time that told you, pursue what you want, even if other people told you it's silly or you shouldn't do that.
Well, my agent, who's been my agent for 20 years, she told me, just after an education, she said, basically, you've got a very, very brief and privileged window where you will be asked to do things. And in that time, you should only take things that you can't bear the idea of anybody else doing. And that you should just follow that to the letter and she's never pursued anything other than good work and been supportive of that. So that's meant theatre and independent film for the most part. And then jobs like this, which I would have sort of gone through Squid Game to get this job.
I hear they're casting season 2. You could sign up.
Genuinely.
You make your painter movie and you go on Squid Game, the challenge.
Yeah, I would just want to be in the reality show because I just loved it so much.
How would you do? Which game would you lose on?
I'm not good at the licking the biscuit thing. I'd love it, but I don't think I'd be good at it.
Right, I respect that. Yeah. I wouldn't lose at any of the games. I would lose at living in the dorm. I couldn't handle that.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't like that either.
All right, I have to ask just one last question. This is my favorite question, but nobody likes it, but I don't care because I think it's important.
Oh, God.
In this industry, some people out there know this. I've gotten in the habit of ending on this a lot because I think it's a beautiful thought. A lot of people in this industry give awards to each other, and that's wonderful. No one says good job to themselves nearly enough. I want you to pinpoint something you did in Maestro that you think you'll be able to look back on and say to yourself, damn, I'm proud of what I did there.
Oh, God, I'm English.
I'm so used to this reaction now. You can't get out of it. Can't give a cop-out answer.
Writer, what should I say? My best friend's here. He's like, nothing. Counting. Oh, counting. Oh, no, this is nice. No, so there's a bit at the beginning of the film, thank you, where we're sitting back to back. And the day that we shot that, Bradley said, I'm going to do this big crane thing and it's going to come in on us and we're going to be sitting back to back and I want you to think of a game that we can play. And I was like, and it was my first day of shooting. And I was like, he's challenging me. The director's challenging me. Anyway, I thought of this game. And it was a game that my brother and I played when we were kids, where we would sit across the table from one another and hold hands, both hands, and look in the eye. And we would try and see if we had a psychic connection. And we would try and send each other a number between 1 and 20. And so I'd look in his eyes and go, like that, and then he would try and guess. And anyway, for years we thought we had a psychic connection, but that was the game. So yes, I put that in the film for my brother.
That's a great answer. That's an extremely memorable element of the film. You should be proud of that. Good. Congratulations on Maestro and everything you've accomplished. Thank you for sharing some of your experience with us.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you all for being here.